Good morning.
Good morning.
The Education and Practice Committee of the North Carolina Board of Nursing will now convene. This meeting is being recorded, and your continued participation indicates your consent to be recorded. The video will be available on the North Carolina Board of Nursing's YouTube account. Moving to the State Ethics Act. In accordance with the State Ethics Act and the Code of Conduct for members of the North Carolina Board of Nursing, it is the duty of every member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict. Does any member have any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before the Education and Practice Committee today? If so, please identify the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any undue participation in the particular matter involved. Seeing none, I will now move to announcements, and I would like to welcome all committee members and staff. I would like the committee members and staff to introduce themselves, and we will start from my far right.
Good morning, Meredith Paris, Director of the Legal Department.
Good morning, Catherine Moore, Chief Legislative and Quality Officer.
Good morning, Dr. Edna Ennis, Board of Nurses.
Good morning, Dr. Amy Steele, board member.
Good morning, Crystal Tillman, CEO of the board.
And good morning again, Raquel Ingram, Chair of the Board and Chair of Education and Practice.
Good morning, Joyce Winstead, Director of Practice and Liaison for the Board of Nursing and the Education and Practice Committee.
Good morning, I'm Laura Bartlett and I'm the board member.
Good morning, Andrea Jepson, Vice Chair of the Board of Nursing.
Good morning, Anna Seaman, board member.
Good morning, Stacy Thompson, practice consultant.
Good morning. Paulette Hampton, Practice Coordinator.
Thank you, and good morning again to our board staff. I would also like to welcome our guests who are in the audience or observing online today. Audience and visitors, please sign in at the desk if you have not already done so, and indicate if you wish to speak during the open comment period following the adoption of the minutes from the August 3rd, 2023 meeting, which is next on our agenda. This committee conducts its business using both paperless online applications and paper materials. This is why you may see the committee members using iPads and referring to hard copy reference materials during this meeting. I ask that you please turn cell phones and digital devices to silent mode and only check devices during breaks. In the event of an emergency, when an alarm is sounded or instructions for evacuation are given, everyone should immediately exit the building at the nearest exits. Once you are outside the building, a staff member will provide appropriate instructions. Moving to the mission. The mission of the North Carolina Board of Nursing is to protect the public by regulating the practice of nursing. The board's mission, vision, and values drive our work as a board and serve as a reminder to us as we carry out our business. The mission, vision, and values are posted on the board's website for reference. Moving to the approval of minutes, do I have a motion to accept the August 3rd, 2023 meeting minutes as recorded?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the approval.
Thank you. The motion has been made to accept the August 3rd, 2023 meeting minutes as recorded by Andrea Jepson. Do I have a second?
I second.
The motion has been seconded by Dr. Edna Ennis. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will now call for a vote. All in favor by show of hands. And it appears that it is a unanimous vote, so the motion carries. Thank you. Moving forward to the open comment period. The purpose of the open comment period is to provide members of the public an opportunity to share their concerns, offer views, and present questions regarding issues that impact nursing and nursing regulation. At this time, it appears as though we have no request to speak during the open comment period. Therefore, we will move to the next agenda item. Next on the agenda is an overview of the purpose of the Education and Practice Committee. The purpose of the Education and Practice Committee is to support the work of the board, to review matters related to education and practice, and to make recommendations to the board as charged. In January of 2023, the Board of Nursing approved the charge for the Education and Practice Committee to review the position statement concerning telehealth, telenursing, and related laws and rules, and recommend needed revisions to the board. The committee's work on this charge contributes to the North Carolina Board of Nursing's 2022-2025 Strategic Plan, Initiative Number 4, which is foster the mobility of licensed nurses and facilitate access to safe nursing care, along with objective number 2, which is facilitate the safe and effective practice of nurses using telehealth and emerging technologies. For a summary of activities, I will turn this over to Joyce Winstead. Joyce?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning once again. This is our third and final Education and Practice Committee meeting for 2023. The practice staff have prepared the virtual PDF committee member packet that is located on SharePoint. The packet serves as an adjunct to the information that has been provided for committee members at the March 15th meeting and the August 3rd committee meeting, and to assist with the continuation of the committee's review of the Board of Nursing's position statement, telehealth, telenursing, and related laws and rules. So the packet provides for your convenience of reference resource materials that have been previously discussed, and it also provides some new information for your review. And you may have noticed that the packet is much smaller than it has been for the past 2 meetings. So let's just take a few moments to briefly look at the packet and see how it's organized. It's important that you download the packet because this allows you to be able to navigate from the table of contents to the sections, from the sections back to the table of contents or the agenda. So that's a very important function that makes it easier to use. So the packet has 7 sections. Section 1 is the agenda. Section 2 is the table of contents. And again, you can navigate on to each section and then back to the table of contents or to the agenda. The Section 3 contains reference documents such as the laws and rules, and these are not new documents, but are documents that have been previously provided in the packets, and we included those again just for convenience of your reference as needed. Section 4 is the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, or NCSBN International Guiding Principles for Telehealth Nursing. Section 5 is a draft of the proposed revisions for the position statement, telehealth, telenursing, which we will discuss a little bit later today. And Sections 6 and 7 are information about the 2 guest speakers that will provide presentations for us today. We also have provided an addendum folder at your desk side, and these provide some hard copies of documents that we thought would just be convenient to have as a hard copy. And when you look at the folder, on the right-hand side of the folder are the documents that are key points that were identified to be included in the revision of the position statements. We thought it would be great to just have that as a reference, as a reminder of what we decided upon with the last meeting. And also on the right-hand side is a hard copy of the revised position statement. On the left-hand side of the folder are 2 resource documents that were provided by our first guest speaker, Quinn Sheen. And it includes the Uniform Telehealth Act summary and the Uniform Telehealth Act, why your state should adopt the Uniform Telehealth Act. And the issue statement for the Education and Practice Committee potential new charge for 2024. Any questions about the packet or navigating with the packet? Okay. So telehealth, telenursing was last reviewed by the Education Committee in 2018. And at this time, the committee members determined that revision of the board's position statement, telehealth, telenursing, was needed to provide clarification of nursing practice related to telehealth and to assure the provision of safe nursing care. And that was really only 5 years ago. And look at the dramatic changes that have occurred in healthcare and especially telehealth during those 5 years. And of course, we have to attribute that primarily to COVID, which really served as that impetus to develop those virtual services and virtual platforms. And so as healthcare continues to evolve, it is anticipated that the use of telehealth and telenursing services is going to continue to increase. The American Telehealth Association stated that by 2030, more than half of the healthcare services provided will be through a virtual type of modality. As Dr. Ingram mentioned this morning, the committee charge for 2023 is to review the board position statement, telehealth, telenursing, and related laws and rules. And today's meeting is a continuation of that comprehensive review that actually began back on March 15th. So I'd like to provide you just a brief summary of the work in which the Education and Practice Committee has performed up until this point. At the March 15th committee meeting, there was the extensive review of telehealth nursing information, which included the North Carolina laws and rules, the Board of Nursing's current position statement, telehealth, telenursing, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing resources, which included the Model Act and rules, and the position statement on telehealth nursing practice. The various definitions for telenursing, telehealth nursing, and telehealth that were obtained from the literature, other state boards of nursing, and professional organizations. The professional guidelines and standards for telehealth nursing, other state boards of nursing position statements and laws and rules, a review of telehealth and telehealth nursing in the literature, other state laws and rules for advanced practice registered nurses, and an overview of the Veterans Administration telehealth services. Then at the August 3rd committee meeting, we received presentations from external representatives from various practice settings across the state regarding their use of telehealth nursing services in their practice setting and any barriers that they encountered when implementing telehealth, with the exception of those technical difficulties. And to guide the representatives in the development of their presentations, they were provided 2 guiding questions. One is, how is telehealth or telenursing being used or implemented in your practice setting? Please discuss the general utilization, modalities of delivery, and nurse and/or APRN role. And as applicable, describe any telehealth or telenursing training provided for the nursing staff and patients. The second question is, other than technical difficulties, what internal or external challenges do nurses and/or APRNs encounter when implementing telehealth or telenursing services? And the representatives that spoke were from various practice settings across the state that included school nursing, rural health primary care center. A client spoke about her personal experience with telehealth services, ambulatory care, a nursing education program. A student spoke about her personal experience with telehealth nursing in her education program, an acute care at-home hospital, an electronic intensive care unit, a critical access hospital, home health hospice and palliative care settings, the Veterans Administration, a psych mental health nurse practitioner, a women's health nurse practitioner, and a managed telehealth services nurse practitioner. There was also a representative from the National Council of State Boards of Nursing that provided a presentation about their international telehealth nursing research study and the international guiding principles for telehealth nursing. Following the presentations, the committee discussed and passed the motion to revise our Board of Nursing position statement, telehealth, telenursing, to include key points that were identified to enhance the clarification and guidance for nursing practice. The key points that were identified to include in those revisions of the position statement are provided as a hard copy in your addendum folder. And they included the NCSBN's International Guiding Principles for Telehealth, Telenursing, Principles 2, 4, and 5 to better align the Board of Nursing position statement. Principle 2 indicates that telehealth nursing back up. Principle 2 indicates that the telehealth nurse must have specific competencies for telehealth nursing. And this also includes knowledge of the language and cultural norms of the jurisdiction where they are caring for the patients. To better align with principle number 4, language was needed to indicate that agencies and facilities have written policies and procedures or protocols in place to guide telehealth nursing practice. And then principle number 5, telehealth nurses who wish to prescribe medications or treatments must have prescriptive authority in the country in which the patient is located. 2 other key points that were identified from the review of the telehealth nursing professional standards, literature, and other state laws, rules, and position statements are: one is the need for nurses' accountability and responsibility to ensure that client privacy and confidentiality of telehealth services and information are maintained. The second point was that the telehealth nurses need to provide their identification to the client during the telehealth services. So all of these key points have been included in the revisions of the position statement. So this concludes our summary of the work we've done up until this point. Any questions or comments?
Any discussion for Joyce? That's a lot of work. A lot of work, a lot of great work, of course, and we are very grateful for all of the work that has gone into this process. And so seeing that there are not any questions, I will ask Stacy Thompson to provide a summary of the presentations given by the representatives during our August 3rd committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in addition to the information that was researched on the topic of telehealth and telenursing, representatives from various practice settings were invited to share information at the August 3rd, 2023 Education and Practice Committee meeting. The information shared pertained to the current practices in telehealth and telenursing. Representatives were provided with the questions to guide their presentations to the committee. The main question for discussion was, how is telehealth or telenursing used and implemented in your practice setting? So representatives were asked to discuss the general utilization, the modalities of delivery, the nurse and/or advanced practice registered nurse's role, any telehealth or telenursing training that is provided to both the nursing staff and patients, and internal and external challenges that nurses or APRNs encounter when implementing telehealth or telenursing services. So 17 representatives across 14 practice settings, in addition to a representative from NCSBN, accepted the invitation to share information to the committee. The practice settings that were represented, as Joyce has already stated, school nursing, rural health, patient experience, ambulatory care, nursing education, acute care hospital at home, EICU, a critical access hospital, home health hospice and palliative care, the Veterans Administration, psychiatric mental health, women's health, and managed telehealth services, so a wide variety of practice settings. A summary of the information shared will now be provided according to the questions that were posed to the representatives in order to provide information across the represented practice settings. Information related to the topics of implementation, modalities, nurse or APRN role, training, and challenges will be included in the summary. So on the topic of implementation, the following information was provided. So a school nursing representative described a collaboration with school-based health center leaders and frontline school nurses that is aimed at working with the PCP, the student, and the family to provide care via telehealth to increase access to services, to address chronic absenteeism, to provide episodic acute care, and provide mental health visits with non-nursing professionals such as social workers. Rural Health described using telehealth to connect patients to services from in-home or in the clinic or also in school-based health centers and provide chronic care management. Ambulatory Care described using telehealth to perform specific activities such as hospital follow-ups within 14 days of discharge that's performed by the physician, conduct simple visits so that the patient didn't have to travel for conditions such as flu, sinus, or colds, and hospice care to allow the PCP to continue providing care as a consulting provider. A nursing education program provided information regarding the implementation of telehealth as a result of FNP programs being challenged in securing clinical sites, allowing students to participate in telehealth. The use of telehealth in nursing education focuses on the rural health settings, veteran access, and then school nurse telehealth. A student enrolled in a DNP program described using telehealth within the curriculum to participate in instruction of clinicals that mimic real-time, real-life encounters with a platform that has a virtual waiting room, a virtual exam room, and also provides access to the medical chart all in one. The use of telehealth in the acute care setting, specifically hospital at home, began as a COVID virtual hospital and implemented inclusion and exclusion criteria for patient selection for telehealth services. At a critical access hospital, telehealth was implemented as a tele-stroke program to access a tele-specialist. So telehealth services have grown to also include telepsych and teletherapy within this critical access hospital. A psych mental health nurse practitioner described the use of telehealth in medication management and psychotherapy. The implementation of telehealth can really be seen across a wide spectrum of practice settings with specific reasons for implementation, but a common reason for implementation across these practice settings is to increase access to services. The next topic of modalities, a lot of information was shared, and so across the settings, the modalities that were discussed include a telehealth clinic in a school building, using unlicensed assistive personnel as telepresenters for assistance in the telehealth visit, HIPAA-compliant platforms, video conferencing, remote patient monitoring, mobile health, where a patient uploads from a Fitbit or a blood pressure machine in the home for the nurse to then review and monitor. In nursing education, actors are trained in certain situations to present to APRN students as practice in delivering telehealth services. Other modalities are equipment provided in the patient's home, such as a blood pressure cuff, a thermometer, et cetera, and the patient is able to text information and questions to the nurse to receive the education, as well as a virtual call bell. So all of these are modalities that were shared during the discussion. On the topic of nurse and APRN role in telehealth and telenursing, school nursing described the nurse's role in care coordination with patients, with parents, students, and providers. In rural health, the nurse performs assessments and monitors the health status and reviews information obtained via the remote monitoring equipment. The nurse in ambulatory care rooms the patient virtually, prepares the client for the appointment through vital signs or other duties, and then provides education to the client on how to participate in the telehealth appointment and ensures that the patient is able to access on the platform. In nursing education, the student practices with an actor and is allowed to consult with a preceptor and then debrief after the practice. The telehealth visit is recorded for the purpose of the student being able to reflect on the encounter for professional development. In the EICU, the nurse supports the attending physician to continuously advance the plan of care and performs rounding to assist the staff as a second set of eyes. In managed telehealth services, the specific role of the LPN going to the home to perform vital signs, labs, and screening tools with a tablet before the telehealth visit happens with the nurse practitioner. The LPN also assists with the camera when the nurse practitioner performs the assessment. Information specific to training that is provided to the clinical staff included topics of presentation skills, the use of equipment and modalities, point of care testing, medication administration, policies and procedures. Telepresenters are educated to administer meds during the visit. There's education on the software, vendor specific via training modules, elbow support. There's education on the processes and to define the nurse's role versus the physician's role. There's education on the platform and how to decide what services require in-person visits. Navigators in the hospital at home setting shared education specific to the inpatient staff on the concept of hospital at home so that there's an understanding of how patients will go between those two practice settings. Also, education on HIPAA, screening patients for services when presenting to the emergency department, and then communication standards. Information specific to training provided to patients included patients being educated before the visit on how to participate in the telehealth visit, the patients also being educated before the appointment on the actual telehealth platform, and then training veterans with a test call before the telehealth visit. On the topic of internal and external challenges, several themes emerge from many of the practice settings and include that telehealth is not a replacement for in-person services, confidentiality, loss of touch, telehealth not consistently being a part of the plan of care. Also, the challenge of the communication of the use of the telehealth to the patient before the encounter, and communication of the telehealth services provided to the entire care team. In addition to these themes, school nursing described role confusion as a challenge when the school nurse acts as a telepresenter. There's also a potential overlap of orders with the plan of care by the school nurse and telehealth interventions. Adding telehealth as a primary responsibility of the school nurse was discussed as interfering with the primary role and workflow within the school and the extra responsibilities of obtaining the family consent for the telehealth. Rural health discussed challenges of access inequity, getting buy-in from providers and nurses related to the value of telehealth, HIPAA, and the challenge of a misdiagnosis due to the lack of touch. The patient representative shared how the elderly feel devalued, that an in-person interaction is not preferred for certain services, such as meeting a new provider. Also, the confusion of what type of provider is providing the telehealth services, the barriers of being hard of hearing or visually impaired during the visit, a challenge of having less interaction with a licensed nurse, and the loss of personal touch. Nursing education challenges, disseminating information to the community, and also the challenge of the public's technical abilities and understanding of telehealth. From the student's perspective, challenges are that some students prefer face-to-face, and students also face the challenge of deciding what visits are appropriate for telehealth and then assessing the student's capabilities when it comes to using telehealth. In home health, hospice, and palliative care, the challenges of considering what the family prefers, again, deciding what visits are appropriate for telehealth and which ones need to be in person, and also the definition of terms across entities. So what does telehealth mean in the different practice settings and how inconsistent that feels to home health and hospice presently? The VA highlighted a challenge of obtaining trust and providing safety for veterans. Lastly, Brendan Martin, Director of Research at NCSBN, shared information on the International Telehealth Nursing Research Study involving companies employing nurses across 24 countries. 3 key points that he shared in his presentation included that remote patient monitoring is the most common service that is offered via telehealth, that the pandemic drove an uptick in telehealth usage, and the areas of sustaining growth, national laws related to telehealth, nursing regulation, and patient privacy really lack the uniformity and remain unevenly developed. Lastly, there's an opportunity for regulators around the world to collaborate and draft international telehealth nursing guidelines. So the work of this group resulted in 8 guiding principles related to licensure and registration where care is provided, education requirements and competencies that are specific to telehealth, the governance to abide by the jurisdiction of licensure, the scope of practice to abide by the scope of practice in the jurisdiction of licensure, prescriptive authority in jurisdiction of the patient's location. Complaints and discipline occur where the incident occurred and in the jurisdiction of licensure. Employers are responsible for all nurses caring for patients and ensuring jurisdictional requirements of telehealth nursing are met. And lastly, regulators use principles to educate the public. These principles are described more specifically in a document in the Education and Practice Committee packet for today's meeting entitled International Guiding Principles for Telehealth Nursing. So you have that available in your packet. In conclusion, the information provided by representatives from various practice settings provides insight to the current practices related to telehealth and telenursing in the areas of implementation, modalities, the nurse and APRN role, training, and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Are there any questions for Stacy? Any discussion? And so I just wanted to reiterate that we had, and correct me, Stacy, 17 representatives from several areas, several practice areas across the state of North Carolina. So very impressive in terms of allowing us to make an evidence-based decision. Excited about where telehealth and telenursing is going in terms of access. And so certainly we have some challenges in terms of making this happen. COVID brought about a lot of other challenges, but it also brought about some positivity. So thank you for that, Stacy. And so if there are no further questions, no additional discussion, we will now move to position statement. And so I just again want to thank the staff for providing the summaries. And at the August 3rd committee meeting, we also approved the motion to revise the current board position statement for telehealth, telenursing to include the key points that were identified during our meetings that Stacy just referenced. And so I would like to ask Joyce Winstead to provide us with a review of the proposed position statement revision.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so the revised position statement, you have an electronic copy in your packet, but you also have a hard copy in your folder, whichever one is more convenient for you to look at and review. In the electronic packet, it is in section 5. So the revisions to the position statement are indicated by an underline and a highlight in yellow, and that's for easy identification. As the staff were reviewing the position statement, we also took the opportunity to make a few minor edits or editorial changes. And these changes are also indicated by an underline and yellow highlight. In looking at the draft revisions to the position statement on page 1, there are several editorial changes, and these were made to provide clarity and to assist with readability. So the first edit was to delete the phrase "with or without an intervening healthcare provider." And we recognize that this phrase does not actually provide clarity, but may actually create some confusion. So we propose to delete that. The next edit was with the first sentence under the general information. And again, this was made just for clarity and readability. And the proposed revisions are state consistent with laws of the Nurse Licensure Compact, of which North Carolina is a member. Nursing practice occurs at the location of the client at the time services are being provided. And then on page 2, there are some minor general edits that are really self-explanatory. In section titled both RN and LPN roles, beginning with number 2, the information reads, accept responsibility and accountability for client care by telehealth or telenursing modalities provided the nurse has. First bullet point, documented education, skills, and validated competencies necessary to deliver telehealth nursing services. And bullet point number 2, knowledge of the language and cultural norms of the jurisdiction or jurisdictions where the client is receiving nursing services. And these revisions were made to align with NCSBN's guiding principles number 2, which requires telehealth nurses to receive the education and training to enable them to acquire the competencies needed for telehealth nursing services, and to also include the language about the need for knowledge of the language and cultural norms of the jurisdiction where they are caring for the patients. In the section titled APRN Role, there was a minor editorial change deleting the word telemedicine. And then a continuation of that section on page 3. Some information was added for clarity purposes, and it addresses the APRN who is approved or recognized to practice in North Carolina and who may want to provide telehealth services outside of North Carolina. And the information was added to include APRNs must meet the licensure laws of the state, U.S. territory, or international jurisdiction in which the client is located. And again, an editorial change just to provide more clarification. The next revision is the addition of the statement, telehealth nurses who wish to prescribe medications or treatments must have prescriptive authority in the state or country in which the client is located. And this statement was added to align with NCSBN's International Guiding Principle number 5. In the next section titled APRN, Registered Nurse and LPN Roles, this is a new section that was added to provide information about the nurse's role to maintain client privacy and confidentiality of telehealth services and information, and to provide their identification to the client during the delivery of telehealth services. So the language that was added to the position statement states for number 1, maintain and safeguard telehealth client confidentiality and privacy, including but not limited to delivery platforms and modalities, information, communications, and medical records in accordance with all federal and state laws and rules and agency policies. And number 2, provide a badge or other form of identification that is readily visible to the client, the telehealth client or clients, and displays the nurse's name, level of licensure, certification, and/or registration held. The next section, titled Role of Chief Nurse Administrator or Director of Nursing or Registered Nurse Leader, is a new section that was added to provide information and guidance for nurse leaders regarding their nursing administration responsibilities for agency standards, policies, and procedures related to the delivery of telehealth nursing services. The Nurse Licensure Compact requires that the nurse be licensed in the state in which the client is receiving services. And although NCSBN's telehealth guiding principle number 4 provides a slight variation from the Nurse Licensure Compact, the Board of Nursing position statement that was added assists with providing guidance for the nursing leadership to have those organizational and agency policies and standards in place to direct nurses in the delivery of nursing services. The information that was added states, as a component of leadership related to telehealth services, nurse leaders are responsible for identifying, developing, implementing, and updating standards, policies, and procedures related to the delivery of telehealth nursing services. And then we provided some updates to the reference list to make that current. So this concludes the revisions. Are there any questions or comments?
No questions or further discussion for Joyce? All right. Well, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the revisions to the position statement, telehealth, telenursing, as presented by staff? Okay, the motion has been made to approve the revisions to the position statement, telehealth, telenursing, as presented by staff by Dr. Amy Steele. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, the motion has been seconded by Dr. Laura Bartlett. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we will now call for the vote. All in favor by show of hands, all in favor of the motion. And it looks to be a unanimous motion, so no oppositions, and the motion is approved. The approved revision to the position statement, telehealth, telenursing, will go to the January 2024 board meeting as a recommendation from this committee, the Education and Practice Committee. So now we will move to the dissemination plan. With the dissemination plan, I would like to thank all the committee members and staff for your diligent work on the 2023 telehealth, telenursing charge. As Joyce Winstead indicated, this is our last meeting for this year. Upon approval of the revised position statement at the January 2024 board meeting, the practice staff will begin dissemination of the information. And I would like to ask Joyce Winstead to share the staff's plan for dissemination of the revised position statement for telehealth, telenursing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as Dr. Ingram has mentioned, the revised position statement, telehealth, telenursing, will go to the January board meeting as a recommendation from the Education and Practice Committee for approval. Upon approval of the newly revised position statement by board members, practice staff will then begin disseminating the information to the public and external representatives. The position statement, telehealth, telenursing, will be disseminated to provide clarification and guidance for nurses, employers, leaders, educators, and the public regarding the LPN, registered nurse, and APRN role for telehealth. So the dissemination plan that has been developed by staff, one venue is to post on the Board of Nursing social media. And that's through Facebook, X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Another venue is posting on the Board of Nursing website under the news and announcement section. Also in the section that we have a listing of the position statements, highlighting it as a newly revised position statement in that list will also help bring attention to it. Another venue is publication of an article in the bulletin that provides information about the work of the Education and Practice Committee for the 2023 charge and information about the revised telehealth, telenursing position statement. Another venue is publication in the board education communique, and that's to provide information for nurse educators about the position statement in telehealth, telenursing. Another venue is to present the information during the Board of Nursing's Nurse Leader Regulatory Orientation Workshop. And this is a workshop that is held 4 times a year for nurse leaders and aspiring nurse leaders. And the hope is then that these nurse leaders will then in turn take that information back to their organizations where they're employed. Another venue is to provide the information in other Board of Nursing presentations, such as the legal scope of practice and the presentation understanding the scope of nursing practice and understanding the scope of practice and role of the LPN. Another venue is to communicate directly with identified external representatives, such as the North Carolina Organization for Nurse Leaders, the North Carolina Nurses Association, the North Carolina Healthcare Association, the speakers that presented to us on August 3rd. And again, these representatives would take that information back to their organization, and also other identified representatives to share the information with. So are there any suggestions of other venues or plans for dissemination?
I think, what Dr. Steele said, it's very comprehensive, and so excellent. You mentioned sharing with North Carolina Nurses Association. Does that include the presentation that, like the one that Sarah did where,
It
Yeah.
sure could.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that would be great.
As much as we can work it into the presentations
Mhm.
would be fantastic.
Any questions for Joyce? Any further discussion? All right. Well, thank you, Joyce. And thank you to the committee as well, to the board, staff, and liaisons. So as we conclude the 2023 Education and Practice Committee charge to review the position statement concerning telehealth, telenursing, and related laws and rules and recommend needed revisions to the board, we are reminded that telehealth is constantly changing and continues to evolve. And so with that, staff thought it would be beneficial to conclude the charge with a slight glimpse into the future of telehealth. Staff have arranged for us to have 2 guest speakers. And so our first guest speaker, okay, so being that we are quite ahead of our agenda, we will take a break and we will reconvene shortly. Thank you. The Education and Practice Committee meeting will now reconvene. Again, staff have arranged for us to have two guest speakers in representation of the charge with a slight glimpse into the future of telehealth. And so our first guest speaker is Quinn Sheen, who has graciously agreed to join us early. Thank you. Quinn is an attorney, strategist, and regulatory advisor who works with clients at the intersection of law, policy, and politics to develop and implement creative solutions. She was appointed in 2018 by Governor Rayner to the Uniform Law Commission, or ULC, which researches, drafts, and enacts uniform and model laws on subjects for which uniformity of law among the states is necessary or useful. She served as the vice chair on the ULC's Committee on Telehealth. And so welcome, Quinn. And again, thank you for taking time to speak with us today and for agreeing to join us earlier than scheduled.
Of course. Thank you. And can you guys see my slide deck okay? You're not seeing all my cheating notes, right? All right. Well, it's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with all of you. I know the board and this committee in particular has been looking at issues of telehealth for North Carolina. And I hope today just gives you a little glimpse into the process of the ULC and our Uniform Telehealth Act. And I'm at the end leaving time for questions to shed more light on the ULC, or also, as you'll hear, there was a 3-year process in drafting this. And I and others on the committee learned a lot about how states are thinking about telehealth issues. So happy to jump in on that. So moving forward. So what is the Uniform Law Commission? The ULC, as I'm going to refer to it, is the oldest state governmental organization. It is comprised of legal professionals and state officials who are devoted to improving statutory law. There are ULC commissioners from all 50 states. And what the ULC does is it studies, drafts, and enacts uniform laws on subjects where uniformity across the states is desirable and it's practical. So just to kind of break that down a little bit, our commissioners are all volunteer attorneys appointed by each state, typically by the governor. North Carolina, I believe, has 11 commissioners right now. I know at least 2 of them, for example, are law professors, one from Duke and one from UNC, as well as some private practitioners. And as I said, the ULC studies, drafts, and works to enact legislation on topics where uniformity among the states is desirable. So some examples are in family law, commercial law, healthcare, as we'll discuss. And since 1982, there's been over 300 acts developed, and they've been enacted over 6,000 times by state legislatures. Each drafting process that goes into the act represents approximately $1.2 million in donated legal expertise. And drafting meetings, are open to anyone. So if you ever hear about them, I'll be sure to let you know on future ones in healthcare, but they're open to any interested parties. The National NCBS and National Council of State Boards of Nursing was an observer for our act. So just generally speaking, what is the benefit of a uniform act? It's really where there's a lot of transactions or interactions between state lines. So, for example, just even outside the healthcare context, if I am in North Carolina and I'm selling a product to somebody in Florida, what North Carolina says my rights are as a seller could theoretically be different as what the state of Florida says are the rights of a seller. And so where we have uniformity on these types of transactions, we can encourage interstate commercial actions, and we can also have predictability. And so one of the areas where the ULC really got its start in prominence was coming up with a uniform kind of commercial contract. I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room who had to learn about the UCC. That is a development of the Uniform Law Commission. And so, the process for how we draft acts is somebody comes to the ULC with an idea saying, this is a topic where we think a uniform law would be beneficial. And so telehealth, much like the commercial contracts I was discussing, is an area where there can be a lot of interstate work. And so someone came to the ULC and suggested that a study committee be convened on the area of telehealth. And so the process with the ULC is it starts with a study committee where they look at the issue, again, trying to say, is this something that states are talking about? Is this something where if we had a uniform framework, it would be helpful? And should we proceed with drafting? The drafting committee then is convened and over a 2-year period looks at all the issues surrounding the topic and starts drafting a uniform law. It's an over 2-year process. It's open to any observers, and the ULC works to invite parties of which who have expertise or an interest in the topic to ensure it's all represented. It is a nonpartisan, wholly nonpartisan endeavor. And once the ULC approves and votes on at an annual meeting to approve the Uniform Act, it then goes to enactment by the states. So with telehealth, a committee that the ULC has that looks at monitoring various issues in healthcare across the states recommended telehealth in 2018. The study committee met beginning in 2019 through 2020. After that, they made a recommendation to proceed with drafting, which occurred over the next 2 years. The committee, as I said, is open to observers, and it had everyone from Federation of State Medical Boards, NCBON, Federal Trade Commission, American Telemedicine Associations, various telehealth companies and practitioners, and then it was approved in the summer of 2022. I go into this history just because when I talk about the act, I want to emphasize that it was the result of a lot of collaboration, deliberateness, and time. State legislatures, as you know, do not often have the time to study an issue and look at the ins and outs. And I will tell you that every word of this act was debated, had questions asked about it. And the timing of this was really fortuitous in a lot of ways. At the time we initiated the study, telehealth was less than 1% of total visits. By the time we started the drafting process in 2020, obviously the world had changed and the use had been up to 80%. So, kind of with this sudden utilization, we started to learn all the distinct ways telehealth was being done to provide widespread assistance to patients in more convenient, sometimes cost-effective ways. Our observers shared how it could be really powerful in combating healthcare equity and expanding access. It could allow a patient to get care from a practitioner no matter where they were located, which could have been, which was important during both the pandemic, but also to address healthcare provider shortages in areas like mental health. So ultimately, we really benefited from learning of all of these dynamics. And after a careful study of the landscape and ensuring that we had things, including adequate patient protections, we believe the act really resulted in the best of telehealth policy. And so the overall goal of the act is to have a framework that improves access to quality healthcare through greater use of telehealth. And towards that goal, there's kind of 3 objectives. And the 3 ways of improving access. The first is to just kind of make clear as a general matter that a practitioner who is licensed or otherwise authorized to provide healthcare in a state in which a patient is located can do so through telehealth. And in doing so, we remove some of the state law barriers to specific technologies and allowing the evolution of telehealth as technologies change. The second and third goal are to really expand circumstances in which out-of-state practitioners are permitted to deliver telehealth services. We heard consistently kind of through our committee that some of the mechanisms out there to really leverage telehealth to use and make more practitioners available, some were great, particularly the NLC was highlighted, and others had some barriers to being used and were difficult, or the incentives were kind of misaligned for patients, for practitioners who might have wanted to treat a patient, but everything that they had to go through, didn't make it possible. So we really looked at, what are ways that we can better leverage telehealth to its full potential, but still retaining the ability of boards to discipline and set standards for practitioners who are delivering care to patients in the state. And then so what we came up with was a registration model, and I'll go into that, but it is kind of an additional pathway where a state can authorize an out-of-state practitioner in addition to licensure and compacts. And the third was to just recognize those situations where telehealth should be allowed to be used by a practitioner who is not licensed in the state, hasn't gone through the registration process, but those circumstances where we believe the state would authorize them in some special circumstances. And when I'm talking about this, we wrote this as a uniform act, but if a state chooses to introduce it, they do it within the framework of the state. So I'm kind of talking, kind of moving forward, I'll be talking as if North Carolina enacted it, but recognizing that has not happened. So the first was just to allow practitioners to use telehealth without restrictions, so long as they meet the standard of care. So this is really, again, if a practitioner is licensed and authorized to provide healthcare in the state, so they have a licensure or through a registration, they can provide so via telehealth if doing so is consistent with their applicable professional standards and the practitioner's scope of practice as defined by the patient's state. So these are a little misnumbered, sorry. In reviewing your position statement, it's fairly consistent with what the Uniform Telehack has done here. It is, the Uniform
me,
Telehack
Quinn?
says,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry to bother you. I'm not able to see your slide. Can you share that?
Huh. This one, you couldn't see it? Did it go? Can you see it now? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, it was you were sharing initially, Quinn, but then it stopped sharing. Do you want to
Huh.
try to share again?
Yeah, it still has me as sharing. 1 second. Sorry, guys. Did that work any better? Okay. Huh. I didn't touch anything. 1 second.
Right.
Let me just try this.
Is there a way to unspotlight her? And
Let me
okay.
just try this.
Hi, Quinn. This is Brad Gibson
Hi.
with the IT department. We're seeing your slides, but they're not advancing. So if you can tell me what slide you expect to be on and tell me when to advance your slides, I can do it for you on our end.
Okay, well, I just changed something. So now I'm not even seeing anything. Sorry.
Escape. Okay.
I'm gonna just, should I stop presenting and reload it?
Sure. That would.
So I'm gonna share with the committee, when we did a practice run, our building and area lost electrical power. So this is just life.
Yeah. So have you seen any of them, or you've just been listening to me just blabbing? Let's see here. I can't remember how I got this off of, let me just try this.
We can see it now.
Can you see it now? Can you guys see it?
We can.
Hard,
Can
it
you
is still the title
advance
slide.
on your end?
Let's see. No. I'm on slide 10.
Okay, what slide are you on at this point,
I'm
Quinn?
on slide 10. It says UTA provides a clear authorization to use telehealth.
Okay, we can see that.
Woohoo! Okay. So, going back to that. So, as I said, there's kind of three things the act does. One is to provide a consistent regulatory framework that's outlining the standards. The first, and that's what this is kind of outlining, it's a clear authorization to use telehealth. And it outlines and makes clear that the uniform telehealth applies to patients located in the enacting state, regardless of the location of the practitioner. So if North Carolina enacts it, it says these are the rules that apply when you are serving North Carolina patients. It's not going to apply to services where North Carolina practitioners deliver outbound care, which is fairly consistent with your position statement, as I understand it, which informs your licensees that they need to check with the laws of the state where the patient is. Our act makes clear that a practitioner-patient relationship can be formed via telehealth. It does not include specifications on the technology that's used, but instead is deferring to the standard of care. And that's because our act really recognizes that telehealth is a delivery method for healthcare. It's not a separate form of healthcare. And so if you are using telehealth, you are expected to meet the same standard of care as in-person or other care settings. And you're also expected to comply with other state laws and federal laws. Our act, as enacted, expects practitioners to be limited to the authorized scope of practice for the state of the patient, as I mentioned, as well as federal or state laws. So if you are serving a patient in a state that has requirements around controlled substance, and you're standing in a state that maybe has different rules, it doesn't matter. You're expected to follow the rules of where the patient is. Two other things really quick that we did. Again, I was focusing on out-of-state practitioners. The Act creates a registry system to supplement kind of full licensure and interstate compacts. And it creates just kind of an additional and streamlined pathway for out-of-state practitioners to treat patients in, say, in North Carolina via telehealth. If a provider, doesn't already have a license, or they're not a member of a compact that gives them that authorization, this would set up an alternative mode. It's modeled after systems that are in place in Florida and Arizona. A number of other states have also implemented them. Requires a practitioner to be licensed in good standing. No continuing education requirements. It's limited to telehealth. You can't become a registered provider and then try to open up in-person services in the state. You are subject to discipline. You need to pay a fee, as well as appoint a registered agent within the state. As I mentioned, a number of states do have this model, and there has not been shown to be increased disciplinary action based on those states that have a registration model. They've done some research on it so far. And then the third kind of area was to create some specific exceptions to licensure for continuity of care and second opinions. This is something else that we really learned in our committee, and other recent kind of convenings has pointed to this, where for various reasons, be it a college student or somebody who's moved or somebody who's traveling, under the current framework in many states, if that patient is physically located in a state where the provider is not licensed, they cannot deliver care via telehealth. And so that was something that the committee wanted to address in a uniform act. And so we do so by outlining some specific exemptions where an out-of-state provider can practice via telehealth without a license or a compact, or even the registration model. They're very limited. So, for example, it would allow a provider who had if North Carolina enacted it in whole, it would allow a provider to treat a patient who was temporarily in North Carolina, be it, they're on vacation, they're traveling for work, they've followed up from surgery, as well as for second opinions. But if they actually go on to treat rather than diagnose, the licensure registration would be necessary. This is fairly consistent with what the Federation of State Medical Boards put in their model policy from 2022, just to, make sure there was a balance between understanding the need for licensure or authorization for out-of-state practitioners, but also continuity of care obligations that are in the best interest of the patient. I'll end kind of on this, which is the importance of having some uniformity across state lines. If more and more states are adopting the ULC, Uniform Telehealth, or even portions of it, that is going to better facilitate interstate care, but also be setting up appropriate patient protections across the board, so that a provider knows that, if all the states enacted it, whatever state the patient's in, they need to be following the rules of where the patient is. They need to understand the prescribing limitations of where the patient is, but also on the same time promoting access through a registration model that allows more out-of-state providers, to fill access gaps or specialist gaps where needed. What was I going to say? Sorry. And, for North Carolina practitioners, if, for the states that have had registration models, it opens up more markets for them to serve more patients outside of the state, where appropriate. So I will kind of leave it at that. I don't know if this is going. If there's any questions on this, our process, if you hadn't seen the slides, I will be more than happy to share them. So you have a copy of them, and I believe I also provided some resources. The last thing I'll say is I believe North Carolina is one of the few states that doesn't have a statutory framework around telehealth. I think around 2018, there was consideration about doing so. And I know in the past few years, there's been the issue of reimbursement. But I do think in addition to board guidance, having an overall statutory framework would be helpful for patients as well as providers, and would encourage the legislature, which I know you're not, the legislature, to do that with input from all the regulatory boards as well. So thank you for having me, and happy to answer questions if we have time. And
Thank you, Quinn. Are there questions, committee members, for Quinn? Any discussion for Quinn? Well, seeing none, Quinn, thank you. We really appreciate your time and your presentation. Again, thank you for coming early, and I also appreciate the historical overview of how we landed here. So thank you again for that.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are still ahead of our current agenda, and we are awaiting, Dr. Dowler, have not heard back in terms of being able to start that presentation earlier. And so we will move to the committee approval of the 2024 committee charge, where I will ask Dr. Jennifer Lewis, Director of Education, to come and share information for our consideration of a new education and practice committee charge that may be brought forth to the full board to begin in 2024. Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To you and to the members of the Education and Practice Committee, I extend you greetings on behalf of the Education Department, including my colleagues, Drs. Milner and Ward behind me, and Ms. Tanya Bodie. As you conclude the current charge, we'd like to take the opportunity to thank each of you for your dedication to thoroughly exploring the field of telehealth, telenursing, and making conscientious decisions regarding language provided for in the board's position statement and through communication venues. The Education Department now asks that you look forward to 2024 and a new potential committee charge. For those of you who are recent newcomers to the committee, I'd like to provide some context ahead of stating the proposed charge for your consideration. Now, as stated in the issue statement for the potential charge, and this is located in the committee packet addendum for you and your review, in response to its 2021 charge that the Education and Practice Committee review and recommend amendments to the North Carolina Board of Nursing Education Rules and 21 NCAC 36.0300, approval of nursing programs. The Education and Practice Committee recommended amendments to the education rules and related definitions. And while this has been a long journey, I am pleased to share that we are moving forward in the rulemaking process. We have informed the public to include our immediate stakeholders of those proposed amendments. We are actively engaged in the public comment period and solicited input culminating in a public hearing on the topic just yesterday, where stakeholders provided feedback. The proposed amendments, as currently written, will allow pre-licensure nursing education programs more flexibility to expand their simulation offerings to students, engaging them in meaningful clinical experiences in a safe environment, while also reducing the strain on our clinical partners. It's our desire to further explore simulation pedagogy in relation to proposed rule language as outlined in amendments to 21 NCAC 36.0321. Staff have recognized the need to review and revise the document titled Simulation Guidance, which is currently available on the Board of Nursing's website, to assure that the guidance provided is consistent with proposed rule amendment language for nurse educators. Therefore, the board staff recommendation is that the North Carolina Board of Nursing charge the Education and Practice Committee to review the document titled Simulation Guidance and recommend needed revisions to the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Are there any questions for Dr. Lewis or any further discussion? Seeing none, do I have a motion, to approve the staff recommendation for the new charge of the Education and Practice Committee to review the document titled Simulation Guidance and recommended needed, let me start over. A motion to approve the staff recommendation for the new charge of the Education and Practice Committee to review the document titled Simulation Guidance and recommend needed revisions to the board.
Madam Chair, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. The motion has been made to approve the new 2024 Education and Practice Committee charge to review the document titled Simulation Guidance and recommend needed revisions to the board by Dr. Laura Bartlett. Do I have a second?
I
Madam
second.
Chair, I second. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
It was first seconded by Dr. Anna Seaman. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we will now call for the vote. All in favor by show of hands. And the vote is unanimous, no oppositions. The motion is approved. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. These are exciting times.
Indeed.
All right, so if there is no update in terms of our second presenter being available at this point, we will take a break and we will reconvene shortly. Thank you. The Education and Practice Committee will now reconvene. Our second guest speaker is Dr. Shannon Dowler. Dr. Dowler joined the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, or NCDHHS, as the Chief Medical Officer for North Carolina Medicaid in 2019 and was appointed as Assistant Secretary for Health Access in 2022. In the COVID pandemic, she led efforts across DHHS related to telehealth and health equity, with a focus on increasing testing and vaccination in historically marginalized populations and rapidly transforming Medicaid clinical policies to accommodate telehealth. Today, she blends her work on the payer side with department-wide initiatives geared towards improving healthcare and access for all populations and is a key leader in the Medicaid expansion work. Welcome, Dr. Dowler. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for taking time to speak with us, and thank you for agreeing to join us earlier than initially planned.
No problem. Shall I just get going?
Yes, it's on you.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Well, I'm coming to you from the mountains of Western North Carolina, where I live on the side of a mountain in a very rural community. So I've gotten the last 4 years to experience rural life and how different it is than urban life. And it's really been good timing with all the things that have been happening in our state from the healthcare perspective. I'm a family doc by background. I have a son who is in his first year of nursing school at Appalachian. So I am feeling more connected to the Board of Nursing than ever before. As I listen to him, he calls me after his clinicals every Wednesday on his way home and tells me what cool things he got to do. And so anyway, that's exciting. But we're here to talk about telehealth, but we cannot talk about telehealth without just taking a moment to reflect on Medicaid expansion. On December 1st, we will do this in North Carolina, which is amazing. Many of us have worked for over a decade to get this in North Carolina. And we know that on day one, 12/1, we're going to have almost 300,000 people move automatically into the full benefit from our family planning population. So our family planning Medicaid's a limited, very limited benefit, but about 300,000 of our members in family planning meet the income criteria for the expansion population. And we are going to move them automatically without them having to apply for full expansion. So this is going to have a huge impact on the health of the state. So I just had to say that. But we will shift to telehealth. So North Carolina has been really actually a leader in the telehealth modernization through the pandemic, in that we set up an evaluation plan before we turned on our first modalities. It also made it easy because we pretty much had nothing at the beginning. So what we were measuring was really from a baseline of not offering telehealth. All we covered was one service that was a remote psychiatric service where the patient had to be in a primary care office seeing a psychiatrist in a distant office. That was the only thing we covered. So it was very rarely used, and really had actually Ben Money, and those of you that know him, he used to be deputy secretary, launched in December of 2019 a telehealth modernization initiative where we listed all the things that we wanted to do, and figured it would take us 3 years and just tons of money and legislative support to make it happen. And actually, we did all of that and more in 6 weeks because of a pandemic. So we rapidly launched modernizations to make sure that the field was ready to take care of people from home. And we looked at those things and made some really intentional decisions about what we put into temporary policy really probably had a role in permanent policy. And so we were able to actually turn on way more than we had ever imagined that we would with our prior work that we had done to get ready for this. We have turned on into permanent policy about 30% of those flexibilities that we had as temporary flexibilities in the telehealth space. And we continue to work to refine that and modernize it. So some of the things we learned in North Carolina Medicaid is we definitely saw that dramatic rise in telehealth, and the data is just staggering to look at. This exponential increase in telehealth care that happened initially in the pandemic. It also showed that telephonic use went up even faster than telehealth use. But when Medicaid said, we're not going to pay 100% of the rate for telephone calls, we'll give you 80%, all of a sudden people started adopting telehealth. And we did that intentionally because telephone is the easiest thing to do, but not necessarily the best thing to do for someone. So it has a role, but we didn't want that to be used out of convenience. We wanted our field to really develop telehealth capacity. And they did, and they provided it. Even though, and I mentioned that we studied this from day one, all demographic groups did use more telehealth as the pandemic progressed. There were some clear inequities. I'm going to show you a slide with that data that points that out. We have also seen in our survey of members that there's actually some bias from practices about who they offer telehealth services to, which is interesting information. And then we saw some really great data results on adherence to prescription medicine for people with advanced behavioral health needs and people with chronic disease as a result of telehealth, which is fantastic. And when we surveyed our members about what their experience was with telehealth consistently now, because we've surveyed them 2 years in a row, they're positive. So generally speaking, parents and parents of children are really positive about the benefits of telehealth. So this is a busy graph, and I'll just orient you to it. The top graph is adults, the bottom graph is children. And what you see is their relative probability of using telehealth compared to the white population. And so when you look at the Black versus non-Black, they were less likely, so it's a negative number, they were less likely to use telehealth than non-Black members. And these are chunks of time over the course of the pandemic. And you don't really see, if anything, it got worse, not better. In the Latinx population, you also saw actually even worse disparities as far as the relative probability of using it. And you saw that it just didn't improve. There wasn't any statistical significance of improving. And the urban versus rural that you did see, so rural was less likely to have telehealth. I will tell you, as someone who lives on the side of a mountain, when we first moved into our house, we spent several $1,000s adding something that's technical that I don't understand onto some tower on the mountain across the way. And my husband had to literally go over to that mountain, cut down trees, and have this pay for this piece for the company to put on so that we could have internet so we could work from our homes. And this was before the pandemic. We just both wanted to be able to have, internet. A few months into the pandemic, we were beneficiaries of that rural broadband initiative. And so this part of the county where we live got high-speed broadband, and actually our costs went down. We spent less money a month, and our internet is so much better. It's better than when I'm in Asheville or in Raleigh. So if you're lucky enough to have it, and if you're lucky enough to afford it, then you have good access, but we have many, many pockets that don't yet. And then the chronic condition, you see the positive. So we saw right away that people with a chronic condition were much more likely to use telehealth, which is great. That's what we wanted to see. Down below, you see the same thing with children, and you see the same trends. These disparities exist and persist. The only place where you see sort of notable improvements is that rural-urban, which is an important improvement, but concerning in the other areas. So we really started questioning that and say, why? Besides just the access to broadband, the access to being able to afford internet, what are the differences? And so we put some telehealth questions in our CAP surveys where we survey members that have Medicaid about their experiences. And what we found was, bottom line, you were less likely to be offered a telehealth appointment if you were Black or if you were Latino, even if you were just as likely to accept it. And so when we asked them, were you offered telehealth? And if you'd been offered telehealth, would you have taken it? And across the board, they're like, yeah, I would have definitely considered this. But they were less likely to be offered telehealth. So that is something that we really have to wrestle with as a healthcare system. We looked early on at, was telehealth making a difference in the outcomes of patients that had opioid use disorder or psychotic disorders? And we saw a really nice, significant improvement. Some people were still getting in-person only care, which is great. But if they weren't using telehealth, they fell out of care and they fell out of treatment. And so that was a really important tool. And actually one of the places in the behavioral health space we've left on more flexibilities. So as we think about the future, this is sort of where I want to pause for a second and think about, what is Medicaid in North Carolina thinking about for the future? obviously this equity issue is really significant and we have to think about that. What does it mean that we're not offering telehealth in an equitable fashion? But also we're seeing that the numbers are going down and down and down. And so practices have gone back to business as usual, as opposed to continuing to like build on the modality. I know it takes me an hour to get into Asheville, and then you got to wait for your appointment and you finally see your provider and then you got to drive back. And I mean, so it's a half day I'm out of work just to go to a doctor's appointment in Asheville. I would much rather have a telehealth appointment if it's something that's not going to require a physical exam. Like I'm not going to see my dentist on telehealth, but I could do a medication check for sure on telehealth. And so why aren't practices offering it anymore? And how can we help build it into the foundation? Also, how do we integrate it into the actual Medicaid delivery system as a fundamental tool? At the same time, one of the things we always have to worry about is fraud, waste, and abuse. And so there's this really delicate balance of, are the right services being offered by telehealth? Are the best services being offered by telehealth? I mentioned in the beginning around the telephone use. I was really concerned about all the telephonic care because I think on the continuum of care, seeing someone in person, being able to touch them, being able to see their body language, being able to have that check their vital signs, like these are all important things and probably I would say the best care. And then in between, there's this real-time audio visual, and then it's telephonic. You can't really see the person. You can't I'll go back to one of the nice things about telehealth is you can see their environment, and you can learn a lot about a person by seeing their environment. But when you go to telephone, you can't really verify they're who they say they are unless you just happen to know their voice really well. There's more risk. You can't really assess any kind of physical exam. It's just on the lower end of care. And then, of course, email communication would probably be at the very bottom end of that as far as the quality and value of healthcare. So are we using the right things in the right places at the right times? And that's really an important question that we're struggling with. How do we measure that? And how do we make sure it's the highest quality of care for our Medicaid beneficiaries? How do we make sure that practices aren't disproportionately providing low value care for our Medicaid members, which is a risk. I was back in the day when I was working with a federally qualified health center. We were trying to bring on a health systems ambulatory practice to our federally qualified health center to get more access. And we met with an OBGYN practice in a rural community who said with a completely straight face, well, could we have a separate waiting room for the Medicaid people? Because like in our other room, we want to have TVs and water bottles available, but that we can't do that for the Medicaid people. They'll steal the things. And so there is this significant bias out there in the world that we have to contend with. So how do we make sure that our Medicaid members are getting the highest quality care that they deserve? How do we build and use remote monitoring and some of the other tools that are out there and build that into our audio and visual telehealth? Huge opportunities there. What do we do about workforce? Everyone's struggling with workforce. I think probably in the nursing field more than anywhere else. Workforce is a really significant concern, not just in the hospitals, but in the ambulatory space as well, and particularly when you get into really rural spaces. So how do we balance workforce implications with making sure people are getting the highest quality of care? And then I think the last thing that's always on our minds is how do we continue to innovate? How do we get better and better? And so that takes me to the next slide, which is this is what we put into permanent policy. It's like an 80-page document. So it is not for the faint of heart, but there are so many temporary flexibilities that we put into permanent policy. They're linked to through this bulletin that we have, and we're constantly changing it. Not a lot now. We're sort of at a pretty stable place with a few notable exceptions. And that's where the piece around innovation comes in. One of the modalities we turned on first was what we're calling the hybrid home telehealth visit. And that was a visit we designed because in the past, Medicaid would reimburse at a pretty high reimbursement rate, relatively speaking, for a physician or advanced practitioner to go into a patient's home and do a home visit and see the person in their home. And so it was more, let's say an average visit reimbursed at $90. This visit might reimburse at $180. I'm just making these numbers up, but it was significantly more. However, if you're in a practice, you have just pulled that provider out of the office for 4 hours because by the time they drive there, they do the visit, they drive back, you've lost a half day of their productivity. So not only have you lost income as a practice, you've lost access. So they've not been able to see people during that time. So what if we said, what if you could send a trusted staff member? And we kept that definition very loose to keep it flexible, because we know in the ambulatory world, people trust people in their homes in a different way. And so that sometimes maybe it was a medical office assistant that was a trusted staff member that could do the thing. But maybe it was an RN or an LPN. So we left it vague, but they could go into the home, do the home visit. They could get that same high reimbursement rate, and they could do vital signs. They could do a urine dipstick, measure a fundal height on a pregnant woman, listen to heart tones. They could do whatever the things were that the practice was comfortable with. And then they would facilitate a home visit, a telehealth visit with the provider in the office. And so that would still only take that provider 15 or 20 minutes. The practice would lose that staff member for the time that they were gone, but it reimbursed at a rate that really worked for everybody. Unfortunately, hardly anyone's used that. So that's the idea of how do we keep innovating? How do we find out how to get to people to get them what they need? It's not always driving into the offices to us. We've got to get more creative about the way we provide care. So when I said that we're continuing to make changes, it is through this process. So about 2 years ago, we put up a public facing process that still a lot of people don't understand or know about. And it's our provider stakeholder request for coverage form. So anyone can go in and say, hey, Medicaid, you big dummies, why aren't you covering X, Y, or Z? And it's maybe something that all the commercial payers cover, but for whatever reason, Medicaid missed the memo and isn't covering it. So we wanted to put that out there so you could tell us if we missed something. Or maybe there's just something new that not everybody's covering yet, but it's going to be a game changer and transformative. So it could be a coverage of a service, it could be a device, it could be a medicine, it could be any kind of thing that you want to get on our radar as something that Medicaid should be covering. And so anyway, this process is there. We are getting much better at moving through them pretty quickly. Sometimes we can do the things, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have authorities from the state or federal government that make it so that we can't do it. But sometimes we can. Sometimes it has a huge fiscal note. An example of that would be obesity treatments, pharmaceutical obesity treatments for adults. We're talking about a $20 million fiscal impact. So if we do that, which we would love to do, we've got to figure out where that money is going to come from. So we can't just say, yeah, sure, we'll cover it because the legislature tells us how much money we can spend. So we are taking these, and some are getting approved right away, some are taking longer. But I wanted to make sure you were aware of this because it can come from anyone out there in the field, and we would love to have your input if we're not covering something we should be covering. And that is it. These are some of my my farm animals and friends up here in Madison County. And life is always better with farm animals. So I will stop sharing my screen and just open it up. That was a pretty fast overview of a ton of telehealth work, but I wanted to create some space for dialogue and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dowler. Dr. Amy Still has a question for you.
Thank you, Dr. Dowler. You are hilarious. I appreciate your humor on such interesting and serious topics, especially racial equity in rural communities and just racial equity in general. But I have a slightly off-topic question. It's on topic, but off-topic. Your blog is entitled "In My Defense, I Was Left Unsupervised," or there's a shirt you're wearing on your website that says, "In my defense, I was left unsupervised." Are you a member of Gen X, out of curiosity?
I think I must be.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very, very cool. I'm in the same generation, so I was left unsupervised a lot. But my real question is around racial equity. You said we need to, basically get into it and understand and maybe educate practitioners a little bit more about these types of the comments, the perspectives, all of the things. So what are some suggestions or recommendations you've made either to the North Carolina General Assembly, to nursing organizations, to groups, hospitals, practitioners, et cetera, on how to really tame their bias and be more inclusive and et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I have I do something once a month called a back porch chat or a fireside chat, depends on the time of year, where we'll have between 250 to 500 providers. And it could be a blend of different provider types. We'll have speech therapists and behavioral health providers and others. And I've shared that data on more than one occasion to really push them to think about what they're doing. It's obviously, I mean, it's the effects of systemic racism. I don't think practices intentionally say, I'm not going to offer telehealth to my patients who are Black, but for whatever reason, they're making assumptions when they're offering appointments about who would accept telehealth or not. It's a little easier in the Latinx population to say if there's a language barrier, it's really hard to coordinate interpreter services through a telehealth visit. And so I could see from an operational standpoint, not that it's acceptable and we have to overcome it, but that I can see that. I really struggle with the other. And so so the question is, who's offering the appointments? It's probably not the physicians and advanced practitioners in the office. It's probably a front desk person or a scheduler, maybe someone with a high school education. So how do we encourage our practices and health systems and the broader healthcare world to examine these biases? A lot of people have said, oh, we should have mandatory training for board renewals. My experience with that is people just click through the slides that you tell them to click through, and you probably haven't changed their behavior. So it's got to be earlier. It's got to be in the education system and, part of the training experience. And I think we just have to completely make people uncomfortable. We have to share the data of what they're doing and just create discomfort and disruption.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Dowler? So Dr. Dowler, I too found your presentation just fascinating, just phenomenal. Thank you for sharing the information about Medicaid expansion. And I especially like the component where people will automatically be transitioned and not have to self-enroll. So that's phenomenal. The access to internet is just amazing how we live in the city or in suburban areas and we take that for granted. If internet is out for more than 30 seconds or things are slow to download, we have a fit. And so just to hear what you went through and then to just think about rural areas or patients trying to access things that are just like right there for us is just really enlightening. So thank you for sharing that. And finally, thanks. I don't have another word right now for thanks, but I have an adult son who has Medicaid because of his disability. So to imagine having to go to a different waiting room because he has Medicaid, it's just really interesting. I would, and I know we're being recorded, but I would make the local news if, or probably national news, if that were to happen. And so just really appreciate that even the mention of the systemic racism issues that is incorporated into all of that, and for your sharing of the inequities, and more specifically for sharing the future as in terms of where we're heading and hopefully in a more positive direction. So any
Thank you. And if I could just respond on the rural
Absolutely.
thing, one of the things I experienced when we moved up here, this was early in the pandemic, and my neighbors, and I say neighbors because we live like up on the side of the mountain, but they're down in the holler. So, I drive past their house on my way out from my house. And they have two elementary age children who were totally remote during the pandemic, and they didn't have internet and they couldn't afford it. They would drive their little four-wheeler to the top of the mountain across from me where the cows are, and where they could get cell service, because you can't get cell service where we live, especially down in the holler. And so they would drive up with their phones to the top of the mountain in the snow or the driving rain to upload their kindergartner's homework for their remote education. And so it's just the inequities of rural, I guess until you live in it and you experience it. I thought I got it. I thought I understood it. But when you actually live in it, it really transforms the way you think about it.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, Dr. Dowler, thank you again for your time and for coming in
Absolutely.
early. Yes,
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
you too. So I would like to again thank both of our guest speakers for providing the presentation and for giving us a glimpse into the future of telehealth. At this time, I would like to move to summary. No, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, is that right? Summary and planning, I'm sorry. So this concludes the Education and Practice Committee charge for 2023. Yes. I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm calming down after hearing this presentation and thinking about my potential cameo appearance on national news. I would remain professional, of course. Board of Nursing, I would not do anything to lose my license, but people will hear from me. All right, now that I have regathered my thoughts. So the revised position statement, telehealth, telenursing, will be presented to the January board, at the January board meeting as a recommendation from the committee. The new charge for the Education and Practice Committee to review the document titled Simulation Guidance and recommend needed revisions to the board will be presented at the January board meeting for approval. Our next committee members will be March 6, 2024. At this time, moving towards adjournment, I would like to remind all committee members to complete your travel reimbursement form, and I would like a motion, please, to adjourn this meeting.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
The motion has been made to adjourn the meeting by Dr. Amy Steele. Is there a second? Okay. Okay, all right. I heard, of course, as previous 2 seconds. And so we will take the second from Ms. Andrea Jepson to adjourn. So the meeting is now adjourned, and thank you so much to everyone. And lunch is provided. Thank you.